Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you had the hardest job on planet Earth, a White House press secretary, spokesman for the President of the United States. How would you rate your tenure at the White House? You can be a letter grade, numerical, Siskel and Ebert, thumbs up. How do you think that you did looking back on it now?
I think that considering the nature of Trump's presidency, that he was a disruptor, that this is a guy who didn't come at this with a group of political loyalists that a lot of people have had in the past. I think we did really well. When you look at what we accomplished in the first 6 months and the groundwork that laid to things like tax reform, I think it really was a disruptive time, but it also was a productive time.
Absolutely. I certainly agree with that. Can you take us behind the scenes a little bit? I've always wondered about that job, more than the chief of staff, more than even the president, what it is like in that pressure cooker for the press secretary. What does a typical day look like?
It's a great question because I think there's a question of what does the job normally look like and what does it look like under a Trump administration? Because One of the things that I did is really speak to a lot of my predecessors and try to understand the battle rhythm of the day, what happens, the process that they all undertook. And that was vastly different under Trump because, for the most part, throughout my career and throughout the career of most press people, you're advising the principal as far as what to say, when to say it, and even what platform to use. With Trump, he's pretty much the lead on a lot of those things, and that's a very different dynamic. And when it came to the briefing, obviously the intensity and scrutiny during the Trump administration was vastly different than it has been under any previous administration. And so the job in itself is very, very different than it was in the past. And part of the, you mentioned the book earlier. I walk through a day in the life, what I used to be like to get ready every day. And the only way to really, the short end of it is it was like getting ready for a final exam every day.
Well, I really look forward to reading it. I always try to read the book before the interview, but I don't have a copy yet, so I'm eagerly looking forward because it sounds really good. And I agree, obviously, the Trump administration is just a different beast than these previous administrations. I thought you handled yourself wonderfully. I was a big cheerleader of Sean Spicer and Sean Spicier.
I knew there was one. I knew there was one out there.
Yeah, right.
It's funny. Can I tell you a funny story that you just brought that up? I've been at an event for my son in the last hour or so, and I walked in, and one of the other parents said, "Gosh, that tweet you put out about Trudeau was hysterical." And I said, "Are you being serious? Because that's not me, right?" And they were like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "You're following a parody account."
That is, a lot of people will, I'll see those tweets all the time. And I think the reason the parody works so well is because the account of Sean Spicier, or the spicier version, it actually does channel a lot of that spirit you brought to it. I mean, I always felt you were, I felt you were far kinder to those blood-sucking leeches in the media than they deserved at all. I thought, you handled them very well. Do you have any regrets about them? I found they would always try to gin up these fake gaffes about you, like, you were lost in the bushes or something, or you made a completely accurate statement about the number of people who viewed the inauguration, and they would pretend like you were saying these crazy things. Do you have regrets about that? Do you wish you had, been harder on them or something?
Well, there's a lot of interactions that I've had, whether it's personal or professional, when I'll look back and say, could I have been better at that? And I think just because it's a lot of the advice that I looked back on was stuff that, most of our moms teach us.
Right.
2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because they said it doesn't mean you do too. And so there were times when I think I probably let them get the better of me once in a while, or we escalated too quickly. But you're right. I mean, there were times when I looked at and I thought to myself, wait a second, the job of the press secretary is to speak on behalf of the president of the administration, the American people. And it was too often that I had to talk about myself. And that's not a good place to be as a press person.
Right. Well, this gets to a real question, because there seems to be this media crack-up in the last few years. In the old days, the networks dominated. Republicans had to play with these guys, even though they were quite hostile. Now we have all of these other outlets. We have Twitter, we have live streaming. You've been in Republican communications for a long time. People know you primarily as the press secretary. You were communications director for the RNC, House Budget Committee, chief strategist of the RNC. You've known them for a long time. This question has two parts. Should Republicans still talk to outlets that are hostile to them, the New York Times, or should we tell these lefty mouthpieces to go pound sand? And second, are there any good journalists that you would still recommend? These guys are doing hard work. They're not just partisan hacks.
Two great questions. On the first one, yes, we should talk to them. Because you don't seed ground, you don't grow the audience, you don't allow people to hear conservative ideas if you ignore them. I believe, just like, that if you look at what the church does in terms of missionaries, the idea is to go out there and to spread the good news. And I think if you are a social and fiscal conservative, then part of what you want to do is go out there and explain to people, because what happens more than anything is a lot of these mainstream outlets either, cover conservatives in a very nasty way or don't cover issues of importance. And so by being out there, it allows people who might be watching that to say, hey, I never thought of that issue in that way, or I never knew that I shared the views of, a particular person who might be espousing them on a policy or what have you. And so I think it's a great way to grow the movement. And secondly, yeah, there are a lot of great reporters in that briefing room. And, the interesting thing is, and I actually have a part in the book where I talk about this, where there are some really good reporters at a lot of reputable outlets. It's not always just the broad brush, the Washington Post, the New York Times, or whatever. There are good reporters at a lot of these institutions. And what I want to do is make sure that we call balls and strikes better, that we call out the bad reporters and then we praise the good ones. Because when we just say fake news or the New York Times is horrible, then we sort of dismiss the ones that are actually doing a decent job. And I think what has really killed things is two things. One is social media, where reporters almost act as if people don't have Twitter accounts themselves because they express these opinions and things that really expose their liberal bias. And second is the need for a lot of these reporters to get on television will make them say and do outrageous things to sort of get themselves booked.
That makes perfect sense. The sensationalism of it. Obviously, not every reporter is just Jim Acosta, who I believe is played by Will Ferrell these days on television. There are people at these outlets who aren't just the editors. They are doing work, and I agree. I think it might be something about our Catholicism that we just are perfectly willing to talk to anybody and go into the belly of the beast. But I have taken too much of your time. You got to run. You are with your family right now. That's another important thing.
Thank you. The funny thing is, after reading your book, I really felt inspired. People ask me all the time, why did I want to write a book? And I just felt your book really laid out a lot of the policies that I think were so key to the Democrats' current state of being that I just needed to kind of put my thoughts to paper. But I think it was a lot more writing than you probably did, though.
Well, perhaps. Although I did a lot of research, and I will say, Sean, I always knew you were a gentleman, but now I know that you're a scholar as well. So I look forward to reading yours.
There were a couple. At some point, we have more time. I want to debate a couple of the issues that you raised in there. Right around the 200-page mark, I thought you got into some pretty meaty stuff.
It does. It's an esoteric reading too, so we'll really have to go into the different layers that we have there. But I suppose that'll be for a future episode. Sean, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it, and I'll talk to you next time.
You bet. Thank you.